But welcome everybody. My name is James Donnelly. I'm the current chair of the Community Foundation of Broward. And I want to welcome you on behalf of our board of directors. And I see some of my wonderful board on the screen here today. We are welcoming today Fundholders, Legacy Society members, PAC members to this exclusive Food for Thought event. And I see my wife, Kathy, on there. We're also Fundholders and Legacy Society members, proudly. Before I jump into the program, and Nancy's going to get mad at me for going off script, but our fiscal year is June 30th. And so we had our last board meeting of the year this week, and I was marveling at what our management team and the board have done in 12 months, especially in the midst of a pandemic, including an incredible pivot last spring, to reallocate funds to where they were most needed in response to COVID-19. Oh, and by the way, we hired a new CEO and transitioned from Linda to Jennifer. Our Be Bold campaign under Nancy's leadership continued, and we currently have the highest assets in our organization in our history. And then we thought we should recognize the hidden heroes of our community who did so much and had an incredible program to do that. And we also have launched the Be Bold Prize, our $1 million prize that we're going to talk about and award soon. And to top all of that off, our vice chair, Juliet Rulek, is leading us through a strategic relook at where we are. And the data that's going to come out of today's study will really help shape that. But I'm so proud of Jennifer and the team and my fellow board members and all the energy that's put in. I don't think I've ever been on a board that's been this participative. And I wanted to share that with all of you before we jump into today's program. So thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to have an inside look at philanthropy in Broward. I think eye-opening numbers you'll hear today are the result of a study that we commissioned here at the foundation, and we've entitled it Untapped Potential, Philanthropic Potential. And because you are a key part of our foundation, you're getting an exclusive first look. And what you're going to learn today is there's a lot of opportunity in our community. And I think before we kind of go into the report, which, on first blush, it goes, well, why isn't our community giving at maybe the rates of others? I'm actually, though, have on the screen here today all those who did. And so you are 100% part of the solution. And as we always do, we're going to ask you to help us with the data that we get today. Local philanthropy helps shape our community. It unites us and really focuses on building a stronger Broward together. And you are amongst the most generous people in this county. And the fact that you've already stepped up and partnered with the foundation to establish a fund or plan to create a fund through your state really speaks volume about your commitment and the commitment that we believe is there's more of in our community. But today you're going to see data, and data is always good to take you off of narratives. It really puts them up against reality, and you're going to see some untapped potential. Many of our neighbors have the capacity to give, but haven't yet. Why? And how can the Community Foundation help untap some of that potential and put it to the incredible increasing needs we have? If they do that, we will have the funds we need to help solve the problems that we have. But with really what I want to do is hand this off quickly to Nancy to provide us a little more perspective, Nancy, on why did we do this study? What was the context scope of the study? And then we'll jump in. But this is going to be my last time to speak because Jennifer really controls that. So I would just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you. We're really, really proud of what we're doing at the Community Foundation, and we can't do it with all of you. So thank you. And Nancy, take it from here.
All right. Well, thank you so much, James, and good morning, everybody. So we are so pleased to share with you the Community Foundation of Broward's philanthropy study. And as James mentioned, we are titling the report Untapped Potential, growing philanthropy in Broward. So as you're going to hear today, Broward is a philanthropic community, and you guys are all living proof of that. But as we've suspected for a long time, the data indicates that our Broward community is really not reaching its full charitable giving potential. So here's the agenda for today. I'm going to share with you why we commissioned the study and where the data came from. And then Nancy Meyer, president of the Miami Herald and an esteemed member of our board of directors, is going to share key findings. Dr. Shelley Robertson, who is our principal researcher, is going to dig deeper into the data. And then our wonderful president and CEO, Jennifer O'Flannery Anderson, is going to bring us home with some questions and answers and to talk about the foundation's next steps for the philanthropy study. So before we dive into the data, let me share with you a few reasons why we commissioned this study. Next slide, please. So first of all, this study not only helps us understand Broward's philanthropic landscape, it delivers on our promise to inform and arm you with knowledge that you can act upon to help Broward evolve as a community. And now we've all seen how important reports like the Silver Tsunami and the Broward Pride reports have been in helping us and our partners to develop strategies to address challenges in our community. And just like these reports, this philanthropy study is going to provide us all with valuable information to help us and our community to make informed decisions. So the report quantifies Broward's charitable giving strengths and its deficiencies, and it really helps us understand how Broward's charitable giving stacks up against our peers in the state of Florida and across the nation in similar sized communities. It is also going to inform our community for further action. And finally, as James mentioned, this data is going to be so helpful as we embark on a new strategic plan. And then we set out to attain the ambitious goals of our $500 million Be Bold leadership campaign for Broward. Next slide, please. So you might be wondering, where did the data come from for this study? We didn't do this in a vacuum. We actually leveraged the expertise of multiple partners, including the Florida Nonprofit Alliance. And at the same time that we were taking a deep dive into the data in Broward, the Florida Nonprofit Alliance was collecting data for a statewide philanthropy study. Now, this study has also been published, and you can access that on its website, on their website. The Florida Nonprofit Alliance also provided some of the statewide data for us and for Broward that we have used in our published philanthropy study and what you will hear today. So we also contracted with Wealth Engine to analyze more than 1.5 million profiles of individuals living right here in Broward. And that was helpful in helping us to find causes that were supported and estimating Broward's giving potential. And then the cornerstone of this project is Dr. Shelley Robertson, who is our principal researcher. You're going to hear from her as well. Dr. Robertson has been working in the nonprofit industry since 1996. She holds multiple degrees, including a Bachelor of Arts in Business Administration, a Master of Arts in Applied Economics, a doctorate in Organizational Leadership. And then she's also a member of the American Evaluation and the Southeast Evaluation Associations. Her company, Robertson Consulting Group, has provided evaluation services to federal, state, and county governments, foundations and other funding organizations, community-based coalitions, and universities. So, and some of you may also recognize Dr. Robertson. A few years ago, we partnered with her to conduct a fundholder perception survey in which many of you participated. So she has been with us for a long time. So you'll hear from Shelley in a minute, but first I'd like to turn the presentation over to Nancy Meyer, again, president of the Miami Herald and a wonderful partner to us, member of the Broward, of the Community Foundation's board of directors as well. Nancy is going to share an executive summary of the study. So Nancy, I'll turn the presentation to you. Thanks so much.
And Nancy, thank you. So good to be with everybody here today and see everybody. It's great to have such interest. So first, I'll do like James did, start off with the good news. And the good news is we should be very proud of, the county in which we live for the mere fact, we give over $1.2 billion annually. And so as a county, we do recognize we recognize nonprofits in need. We recognize the need to give. So let's point out the fact that we do give generously, but there are areas of improvement. And these give us sort of a guidepost, if you will, of directionally where we can go. So $1.2 billion that we give annually, about 65% of that comes from households of $200,000 a year or more earners. The greatest concentration, as you get into some of this data, is quite interesting. The greatest concentration of giving came from 3 zip codes in Fort Lauderdale zip codes, 33301, 08, and 33316, excuse me. What we also looked at, though, is there are other zip codes that have potential, Cooper City, for example. So while there's great concentration in 3 zip codes, we are seeing in areas what I'll call young growing families where there is opportunity. Middle income donors give more of their earnings, 4.2%, than our higher income residents that are living in county. So that's definitely an opportunity. If we could get a percentage point more, that could substantially change that direction. And then giving lags behind similar sized communities in Florida and nationally. This could have some reason. We have snowbirds. We have people who live in other areas, certainly. But when we look at this, other size communities in Florida, we run behind Hillsborough, we run behind Orange County, Palm Beach, Miami-Dade. And just to give you some percentages, Duval County is about 4.6%. We are 2.7%. Orange County is 3.1%. So it just gives you a guideline of where we are. And then nationally, we fall behind similar cities our size. So a Cleveland, a Kansas City, a Nashville, Austin. So these are, if we look at this and say, are we aspirational in what we want to do? What are these cities doing that maybe we can learn from? And then what we also saw is the most supported philanthropic causes are health, environment, religion, and children. So again, this also helps denote where there's interest and where people are donating. Next slide. And then from this information, as you can see, we start to set up, okay, what kind of strategy, what could be aspirational in dollars that could be donated. An additional 300 million could be generated annually if upper income donors give the same percentage, 3.3%, as their national peers versus what they're doing today. And if I remember correctly, going back one slide, I think it was 2.3%. Well, thank you very much. As I talked 2.3, I was correct. Okay, numbers sometimes in my head get changed up. Philanthropic resources could increase from 1.2 to 1.9 if individuals gave at the same level as their Florida peer communities. So when we look at someplace like Hillsborough or Palm Beach, if we were to increase that sum, there could be 700 billion left. Let me not be your CFO, as I can't count from 1.2 to 1.9, but $700 billion. And then in addition, between 2016 and 2018, 70% of grants from private foundations that give in Broward went to organizations outside of Broward, or 162 million. What does this mean? It means that in totality, there are about 200 plus private foundations in Broward County. Some of these may sit in Broward and decisions may be made here, but they may represent outside of Broward interests. So it could be, private foundation, but my money gives in health, but in, Tallahassee, let's just say. But there are dollars that are contributed to Broward. And then how do we make up a bigger percentage of that? How do we, go after these dollars if there's opportunity for Broward specifically? So you can see we give generously, but there is certainly opportunity as we look towards the future, and we can be very specific in what we may ask and or where people fund. So from here, I'm going to hand it, I believe, over to Dr. Shelley Robertson.
All right, so individuals account for nearly 80% of all giving if you add together the individual donations as well as the bequests. Foundations are only 17%, which is kind of interesting because I think those of us that are in the industry tend to think about foundations first, and then corporations are 5%. So I just wanted to, we started with this slide because we really want people to, when they think about philanthropy, to realize that it is people giving to their community to make a difference in their community. And so it's important to remember that as we go through. So next slide. All right, so as Nancy had mentioned, we used a couple different sources of data for our study in order to get a full picture of the community. And this particular information comes from, we used two sources. One was tax return data and the other was health and wealth engine data. And I want to just give a brief overview of each. So the tax return data is great for a number of reasons, but it does have a few limitations. One, it's consistent. So it's consistent over time. We can do comparative data to other communities. It includes what we think of as kind of your typical philanthropic giving, religion, education, literacy, charity, and scientific. Some of the limitations are, though, that you only know a gift if somebody itemizes. So it only includes itemizers. Now, typically, your higher income individuals, those that give more, are also itemizers, so you capture that. But there was a tax law change about 3 years ago that reduced that score, and so you had fewer people itemizing. So there are some downsides. The other downside is it's a little dated, so you'll see that our data is from 2018. That's the most recent release that the IRS has provided. And it only includes people that file in that zip code. So in our case, of course, it doesn't include snowbirds, which is why we also use Wealth Engine data. However, it is the most consistent, and it tells you what people actually did. So in 2018, you can look and see that our upper income filers, those making over adjusted gross income of over $200,000 a year, gave almost $693 million, which was 65% of the overall giving. So you can see kind of how that shakes out in terms of the average contribution, as well as the total contributions by income range. All right, next slide. So this information comes from Wealth Engine. Wealth Engine is a private company that collects data on individuals all over the country, and they have algorithms that they use to determine potential for giving, actual giving, and where folks gave. And so we balanced our tax return data with the Wealth Engine data because it, again, has really offsets the limitations of the tax return data. It's more recent. It includes snowbirds. So it includes anybody that is associated with an address in Broward County, not just with a tax return. The downside to it, though, is its estimates. It's not like tax return data that this is what people actually did and reported. So it's often estimated. So between those two, though, we get a really good full picture of what's happening in the community. And I want to give a kudos to Nancy and the team at the foundation for pulling together all of these different pieces, the tax return data, and saying we need this broad view. So you can see that Wealth Engine, they look at just overall donations, and overall people gave more to political sources than they did to other sources. So when we looked at the tax return data, of course, it is looking at just those health, environmental, religious, children, those other categories. This also included the political. All right, so on to the next slide. Let's talk about Broward. This gets really interesting. All right, so here's the giving by zip code. And this is the percent of total reported giving. We'll look at gifts in a minute. But this is where the money came from that was reported on the tax returns. And you can see that, yeah, most of it is on the eastern side of the county. But there are some other areas as well. And it's not always by housing values. So, for example, you've got 33330 and 33332 that have the highest, some of the highest housing values, average housing value, but they're not necessarily the biggest givers. And so that we'll talk about that more later. That's kind of the difference maybe between potential and propensity, that these folks may have the potential to give. They may not currently have the propensity to give. Perhaps they are saving for college, perhaps they are doing other things, but it's really kind of interesting to see that the average housing value doesn't necessarily correlate with where the money is coming from. And you can even see, we don't have all of the zip codes, but Nancy had pulled together the average housing value for every zip code. And some of the lower communities that had lower average housing values actually gave a large percentage of the overall giving in Broward. So that was great. On to the next slide then. So this is average gift size, and this is probably a little more with what you would expect, that the folks on the coast gave a higher average gift, but it did not necessarily always translate into overall giving if it was fewer people. So this was just the average gift. And again, you've still got some of the same zip codes, but most of these are on the Eastern Coast. So Nancy, did you want to weigh in there on, I know that the zip code data was very interesting to you. Did you want to add anything there?
No, just that it is interesting when you think about, where a lot of you all come from, our fund holders, our legacy donors, and it seems like so many really do live in this eastern part of Broward. So I think this data is very consistent with a lot of the folks that have been part of the foundation family as well. So it sort of, it validates, that many come from East Broward.
Yeah, excellent, great. But there still is that potential in Western Broward as well. And it was interesting to see, and we saw earlier that the middle income filers often gave a greater percentage of their income. And I think that may have been a little bit of what you were seeing as well with the folks that have a lower average housing value were also giving at a higher rate, maybe a lower gift, but at a higher rate. And so they were generating a lot of philanthropic resources for the community. Sarasota did a study about 7 or 8 years ago, gosh, it may have been more than that by now, that found something similar, that the largest donation or the bulk of the donations actually came from the middle income filers, and particularly those that were small business owners, and of course those that had children in the community. So it's interesting to see sometimes where that potential may lie. All right, I think we have another poll then, because we're going to move on to comparative data. Oh, sorry, we had one more before then, sorry. So this is the Broward giving by income range. It narrows it down a little bit more, and this is from 2015. So this was from further back tax return data, because this is the only way we could get this particular piece of information. But if you look at the income ranges, people that had an adjusted gross income of 50 to 75,000, they gave 4.2% of their income compared to peer giving, which was 3.8%. So the lower income or relatively lower income givers, income ranges actually gave a greater percentage of their income. So just to let you know where that peer giving number came from, the Chronicle of Philanthropy identified groups of 10 communities. And so we were, of course, one in a group of 10 that are all of about similar size, which is great because that gives you some sense of comparison. And of course, with 10, then some of the differences average out. But of course, they were in different states that it might have different tax structures and also a different economic structure. But it does give you a useful benchmark. And you can see that the folks that were making up to 200,000 actually gave, or actually up to 100,000, actually were more generous than their peers in these other peer counties across the country. Our $100,000 to $200,000 givers were the same. And then people making over $200,000, they actually gave a lower percentage of their income than their peers. All right, so let's move on to comparing us and looking at really some of these communities. So, and I think we have a poll. So we looked at, I want to say, well, I will peek ahead because I have the answer. We looked at the 7 largest counties in Florida, and I'd like you all to pick which one you think gives the highest percentage of their income to charity. So not overall giving, but the highest percentage of their income to charity. And then we'll do the real-time results in a minute. So Kirk, when you see that the bulk of folks have voted, then we'll look at our real-time results. Should somebody do the theme from Jeopardy? Da, da, as we all vote. All right, Kirk, how many folks have voted?
We're getting there. There's still a few more that are
right.
putting their votes in. We'll wait another 10 seconds.
No cheating by looking up on Google.
They'd have to do some digging, I think, to find that one.
Okay, so let's have Abby share the results now.
Great. All right, so our folks on the phone, our folks on the call today thought that almost half thought that Palm Beach gave the highest percentage of their income to charity, followed by Duval and then Hillsborough. So if we want to close that and go to the actual results, I'll walk you through where we compare to our other Florida counties. All right. So the actual the county that gives the highest percentage of their income is actually Duval, so Jacksonville, of course. And I'm going to show you a couple different things here. So the first column, of course, we've got the metro area, Duval down to Broward, the population size, then the total giving reported by itemizers. And so you can see that Palm Beach gives the most overall, but they have a high gift. They're giving per itemizer. They give almost, people that give their average gift size is almost $14,000, but that's only 4.3% of their income, whereas in Duval County, people give 4.6% of their income. And then we also have the Community Foundation assets over there on the far right column. Unfortunately, although Broward is generous, they're not as generous as the other seven largest counties in Florida in terms of either average gift size or the percent of income donated. All right, so let's look at some other comparisons. And again, this is based on tax return data. We'll get to the Wealth Engine data in just a minute. All right, so we then also looked at Broward's giving compared to some peer or national metros, and I want to just point out a few. So those that are in bold there, San Jose, California, Las Vegas, Kansas City, Cleveland, and Columbus are all of a similar size to Broward. And you can see compared to those, San Jose, California, 4.6% of income donated, down to 2.7% of income donated, of course, for Broward. And then on the next slide, we have what Nancy was mentioning early, the aspirational markets. And you can see that Virginia Beach, Indianapolis, Nashville, Austin, and Cincinnati are all of similar size to Broward. And they are giving in, say, the 4.0, 3.4, 3.2, 3.0 in Austin, Cincinnati 2.7, and Broward at 2.7 in terms of percent of income donated. And then average gift size, I think that Broward, unfortunately, yeah, we're average gift size, we're better than Cincinnati and Louisville and some of the others, but not in terms of percent of income donated. So Nancy, I didn't know if you wanted to make any comment there about the aspirational markets.
Sorry about that. We wanted to take a look at, we're thinking as an organization always about our growth, what do we aspire to be? What size does the Community Foundation need to be to really address the challenges of our community and a community of our size? So we wanted to take a look at these peer metros and try to determine, how large are the community foundations in these metros as well? What might we be thinking about, as we embark on growth? Where are they in terms of their asset size? So some of them, like Cincinnati, 762 million in assets, Virginia Beach, 379 million, 854 million in Indianapolis. These are organizations, community foundations that are serving similar sized metros as ours, and can get an idea of, when we talk about this Be Bold campaign, it's appropriate for us to be thinking about growing the organization to serve a community of this size.
Great. All right, next slide. So then that was the tax return data. It was historical. From 2018, and it tells you what people did give. It doesn't necessarily say what people could give or where Broward could go. So for that, we looked at Wealth Engine. We asked Wealth Engine to look at their data. They looked at 1.5 million profiles, and a profile is basically an individual that was associated with an address in Broward County. So that does include the snowbirds as well. And they looked at estimated giving capacity. So they looked at whether people have the capacity to give based on their income, as well as their real estate holdings and other investments. And then they also looked at whether people had the propensity to give based on their algorithm. And what they found was that 1,500 of those profiles have the capacity to give over $1 million, to give $1 million over the next 5 years. 6,000 profiles have the capacity to give in the $300,000 to $1 million range over the next 5 years. 120,000 profiles have the capacity to give between 100 to 300 over the next 5 years. However, capacity is not always propensity. So as we saw, if you were looking at capacity based on average housing size, those folks have a capacity to give based on their real estate, but they weren't necessarily actually giving. So then they also look at propensity to give. And of the profiles, the 1.5 million profiles, 75,000 have both the propensity and the capacity to give a major gift, which was defined as over $25,000. And I'm trying to remember, but I think it was about a third of the profiles have the capacity and the propensity to give a minor or a major gift. So there is a lot of potential there in looking at what people could be giving in Broward. And then when you, of course, look back and say, okay, well, we're not doing as well as, say, Hillsborough or Orange, which are very similar size to Broward. I think that all that starts to paint a really good picture of when we look at people's capacity and propensity, we've got some room to grow there. When we compare ourselves to peer counties across the country, we have some room to grow there. And even when we compare ourselves to counties in Florida that are of similar size, we're still seeing that we're not necessarily giving at those same rates. So what would that capacity be? Next slide. So here is the potential. I will say that this is not a number that exists. This was a number that we looked at several assumptions to create. And I'll tell you what our assumptions were and what some of the limitations might be to some of this data. So if you look at what Broward's currently giving, it's $1.2 billion. We said, okay, what if our upper income donors gave it that 3.3% rate, not the 2.3% rate that they've been giving at? Well, that would get us to $1.5 billion a year. So that would be a good jump. And then we said, okay, well, what if at every income level, Broward gave at the same rate as Hillsborough and Orange? That gets you to $1.9 billion a year. So there is $700,000 worth of additional, is that right? Yes, 1.2 to $1.9 billion that could come in additionally if people were as generous as in Broward County per their tax returns as in Hillsborough and Orange. I will also tell you that we did originally start out by looking at the Wealth Engine data and saying, okay, let's look at the people that have the propensity and capacity to give and what that number would look like if all of those folks gave at their capacity, and then divided that by 5 for the 5 years and said, what would that annual figure look like? And that was, if I remember correctly, was almost $2.3 billion. But we didn't feel that that was really, we didn't know that we could really defend that well because there is no comparative data. So we were conservative and said, we think that 1.9 billion actually is a realistic potential for Broward County. And I think, and because that was really the most defensible, and we can say, look, we can compare it to these other counties. We can actually show the average gift size for each of these income levels. They didn't look out of whack. They looked very reasonable. And we could feel very comfortable with that number. But I did want to just say that if you looked at the Wealth Engine potential and capacity, that number could be potentially even bigger. All right, so that was our individual data. So we started with looking historically at tax returns, what people were giving. Then we compared it to a variety of different communities, both nationally and here within our state of Florida, and then looked at the potential for individuals. So we're now going to move from individuals to foundations. We'll just spend a little bit of time here because that is a smaller percentage of overall giving. But if we'll go to the next slide. As Nancy had mentioned, there are, I want to say there's 272, somewhere in that range, foundations that are located in Broward County. About 100 of them, 92 of them, I think, don't give it all in Broward County. So they're chartered here, but they don't necessarily give it all in Broward County. But there's close to 200 foundations that are in Broward County, that give in Broward County, but they don't necessarily give all of their giving in Broward County. So of that group that we know will fund in Broward County, they have shown that they will because they are giving here. 74% of the dollars went outside of Broward, and 26% of those dollars stayed in Broward. So I'm not talking, for example, about a foundation where the person set it up, they live here, so it's set here, but all the money may go back to, say, a hospital or their alma mater or something in another state. These are foundations independent foundations that are giving in Broward, but they're just not giving all of their money. They're only giving 26% on average of their donations, of their grants here. So there is some potential there. Of course, every foundation has its own mission, its own charter, its own values, its own guidelines. But if they're giving in Broward, there is the opportunity potentially to capture more of those dollars for our community. And then the final slide in the study, there we go, is where that money went. So you can see here that the bulk of it went to health at 24.4%, then education, then human services, then other arts, youth development, and on around. This is, I would take this as a guideline. I wouldn't say take that 74% and multiply the youth development by 7.3 and say, okay, that's what came to youth development here. Because every foundation also categorizes their grants a little differently. And there was some overlap. Some grants were counted in the system as the way that the database is set up that we use. They could count in more than one category. So that's why I use percentages and not hard dollars. But this gives you an idea that the bulk of it does go to health, education, and human services, which I think is interesting. I think the arts donations usually get a lot of media, but really a lot of it goes to health, education, and human services. So the entire
just
study.
a quick comment on this, Shelley, just that this is for the top 20 grant makers, not all of the foundations that we were talking about as well.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, but the top 20 are, I'm trying to remember now what our cutoff was, but the top 20 were giving, I want to say, more than $500,000 over that 3-year period. So yes, if they were a small foundation, they may not be included in these numbers as well. Thank you, Nancy. So the full report has a lot more information, but we wanted to give you the highlights about individuals, what they've done historically, what the potential is, and then also what's happening with private foundations. So I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer at this point to wrap us up.
All right. Thank you, Shelley. I hope you all are finding this really interesting. So my job is to kind of recap what our key takeaways from this study are. And then hopefully we've prompted some questions from all of you to ask to help us make this report better and make it really interesting to share with our community. So if we go to the next slide, I think it kind of summarizes some of the lessons learned. We know that 80% of giving in Broward and nationwide comes from individuals. So a lot of times I hear my colleagues and friends in the nonprofit world talking about going after corporate giving. That's important, but we really know that the majority of giving comes from individuals, and that comes from one-on-one relationships and connections. So that's very important in our world and in the our work building trust and providing knowledge and information about the nonprofit community. One of the things we see is when we look at Broward County compared to our state peers and national peers, we lag behind. And so it makes me really wonder, what are some of the unique factors about Broward? Why are we lagging behind?
Do you want to give it a break? Okay.
Because when you look at Palm Beach or Miami or Tampa, they still have snowbirds and a lot of transient folks coming in and out. So I want to know more about why. So for me, this study prompts many, many more questions. And then I think looking at our national peers, I hope it's aspirational as well, that we really can hold our own on a national scale, and that philanthropy should be one of those metrics that we look at. We also know that there's tremendous potential, because right now giving is concentrated in just a few areas of our county, but we know that there are homes and businesses and people residing across the county. So we've got to get out and find out, how do we tap all of those folks? We know, again, tremendous potential, that 7,500 individuals have a capacity to give at least 300,000 in 5 years. So we have to help develop those folks into wanting to give to others. And if we compare ourselves to our Florida and national peers, there's an estimated additional $700 million that we might be able to attract to support important causes. And I think it's really interesting about private foundations, which are really great partners to the Community Foundation and to many organizations in Broward, that many of them give in Broward, but also give outside. So what can we do as trusted partners to help educate them more about other giving opportunities in Broward that might exist? So what's left to do? Where do we go from now? We have to answer all these questions. So we've got to do some more research. We're going to try to spend some time sharing this information with our nonprofit partners and with other business and community leaders. We're going to use this information to help inform our strategic plan. Again, more research to try to get answers to some of these key data points. And I think most importantly for me, the takeaway is, how do we at the Community Foundation, how do we help lead our community in developing a culture of giving across all of the zip codes, and that giving can be done in small and large ways. And I think that's really evidenced when you look at some of the folks earning 50 to 75,000, that their giving is already at a greater percentage than those of higher income. So people value it. I think we just have to figure out how to expand it and make it something that we all value and we recognize as an important element in our culture and our community. So those are my takeaways from this study. I'm so grateful to Dr. Shelley Robinson for her incredible attention to detail and research and professionalism. I'm so grateful to Nancy Meyer for being this clear head and business brain to really help us put this presentation together for you and deliver this information in a meaningful way. As you can imagine, when we started out, there were 100 slides and the presentation went on forever. So I feel as though every time we do this, we distill it down a little bit better. But we've got at least 10 minutes for questions. So I will start out with a couple questions, and then maybe all of you could raise your hands or put in the chat if you have questions. So first of all, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what might be some of the contributing factors that could be leading to the difference between Broward and other peer communities in Florida and in the nation.
Gosh, that's interesting. So I think the old adage is, you know, you'd have to look at what drives individual giving nationally, and then see how much of that might be true locally. And of course, the old adage is that people give to people who ask for causes that they believe in. So it could be two things. It could be that people are not being taught philanthropy, is maybe the way to put it. People are not being encouraged to be philanthropic. And even if they are, maybe they are not easily able to connect to the causes that are important to them through a personal connection that would encourage giving. So, you know, nationally, the reasons people, a variety of reasons, people give to make a difference, you know, is the number one thing, but they have to be connected and they have to be asked. Mm-hmm. So I would say that it's encouraging people to give and then making sure that they are connected and making sure that they're asked. And that's really the things that drive philanthropy nationally.
Okay, I can see all of you on almost two screens. So does anyone have a question they would like to ask?
This is Larry. Can I ask a question?
Hi, Larry.
How are you?
Good. So nice to see you. Go ahead.
Yeah. In general, again, you pointed out on the presentation that the top giving zip codes were in Fort Lauderdale, particularly in the east part of Fort Lauderdale. I'm wondering, has there been any analysis on the Community Foundation of Broward in terms of what money we get from all our legacy holders and so on? And are we perhaps unintentionally skewing things greatly on the Fort Lauderdale, East Fort Lauderdale side, and not outreaching as we should for the Cooper cities and the Coral Springs of, in the county?
So I think that's a great question. This is data countywide. So I think for us, one of the steps we'll be doing is overlaying our own information. And I think it's a challenge to all organizations to expand our efforts and hopefully develop some champions in other areas to help introduce us and advocate for the causes that nonprofits represent and for issues that matter to those people. So I think the challenge is we have to build that culture, we have to develop that propensity to give, and then we have to be able to execute on the asks, and building the trust, the asks, and then living up to the promise of the gift. So, but I do, one of the things we are going to look at is kind of how does our donor base overlay with that zip code grid.
Excellent. Thank you.
I see Linda's hand up.
It's, mine's a spin-off question off of Larry's. And I had to step out, so you might have addressed it, so I apologize. Shelley, when you did that analysis on the East Coast, and you alluded to it briefly, East Coast communities tend to be, on the most part, older adults than, or empty nesters than the west part of the community, where they might be, I think you alluded to the fact that maybe on the West Coast, they're worrying about private school for their kids and braces and saving for college. Have you did any analysis about the age of the donors within those sectors?
No, we didn't. I don't know with the tax return data, it won't give me like the individual. Funnily enough, the IRS will not give me the individual files that I can look at people's ages, but we could look at the average age in some of those communities, or we could overlay the average age in a zip code with the giving data. So yeah, I think that would be, or even family size. There are a number of things that we could do there to look at that. If I remember correctly, I think Wealth Engine also has the ability to segment by what they call lifestyle criteria, which would be, families with young children, empty nesters, those types of things. So we could look, there are a number of ways that we might be able to look at that, but thank you. Yeah, that's a great question.
And Linda, one of the things we're going to ask one of our advertising agency partners to take some of these zip codes and build profiles on them. So to try to help us explain the differences in these zip codes or these regions of our community. And that may help us understand and then build strategies as well. Ed.
Yes, so certainly this is all focused on where the potential input would be in terms of dollars to the Community Foundation. Have we mapped where the needs are in Broward? And have we done a correlation between needs by zip code to giving to see if there may be less needs in the communities that don't give? And that, I don't know, I'm just wondering if there's any correlation between the source of income or revenue potential versus need, and if there's any correlation. People on the east side may see need greater, right, because of some of the zip codes that are aligned with those zip codes. So I'm just wondering if there's any connection between the two, between receiving grants and then, receiving money and then giving grants out.
I think that's a great point. It's funny, the Broward Workshop had their annual meeting this morning, and the Florida Chamber presented, the Florida Chamber Foundation presented the dashboard of data for the county, and now they have the ability to drill down on some of that by zip code. So I think working with some of our friends at the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance and the county, we probably can get some zip code data. I think that might help us on those profiles of the regions or the zip codes. So that's a great point, and we'll add that in as well. I like that. Thank you. So tell me, have you all found this interesting? Was it surprising? Tell me what kind of struck you the most, and what are some of your key takeaways? James.
I looked at the data obviously before this lunch, and if you just do it mathematically, there seems to be this huge, it is a huge gap. It's a lot of money. But there's a reason our numbers are different, probably demographics, history, need. We don't know what they are. So I think what I'm struggling with, and I think what we're struggling with, is what does this report tell us reasonably we could get to? And, out of simplification, I take where we are and I take the best case and I cut it in half, and I think we can certainly get there. But it'll be interesting how we as a foundation digest this and socialize it in terms of expectation, because as a community foundation, we have to plan. what can we raise? What can we do in this community? And I think the study is a great first step in getting there. But I think that what I'm trying to get down to is how do we take this data and then create a model that works in Broward that's realistically achieved?
I'll tell you, when we were having our committee meetings and our board meeting this week, one of the things we are trying to be very cautious of is we definitely don't want to be critical, or we want this report to be aspirational and to show people that we have the capacity, we have the potential, and all of this will give our community more resources to help more people. So I feel personally like we're walking a fine line, because we're bringing to light something that I think we need to know about, but I don't want to do it in a negative way that makes people self-conscious or critical. So that's just something that's been on my mind about this, and James and I have talked about several times. Are there other questions?
We have a question in the chat. And a
Go ahead,
comment.
Kirk. Thanks.
Elizabeth DeLuca submitted this question, says this has been really great information regarding the philanthropic potential in Broward County. Is there any way to aggregate what the need for philanthropy there is across the county to support our nonprofit and educational institutions, for example, supply versus demand comparison?
That's a great question. And I think that's something for us to talk about and work on. And hopefully the study will help raise that topic so that we can bring other people together to try to put that number together. I think it would be huge, but I think it is something that we do need to know, so that, like, as James mentioned, we can start to crack the nut and make some progress.
I would love that data as well. What I do know is what we only are able to satisfy with our current giving. Someone help me out, like 35% of the asks.
Yeah, we
So-
turn away 70%, James.
Sorry,
70% of the proposals we receive, and sometimes higher.
Yeah, but sorry, we meet 70 or we reject, can't fund 70.
We are unable to fund
Yeah.
70% of the requests that come to the foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the need is, we know the need is great in terms of what we see, but
Right.
then to look at the community as a whole as well would be very interesting.
That would be fascinating.
Mhm.
Kathy Donnelly.
I thought it was really interesting, the figure that you gave for the number of people that are actually giving that are a lower income than what we would expect to be giving. So they were giving more at the lower income level than, and that could be an untapped resource for Community Foundation specifically, because I believe the Community Foundation is seen as, I'm not even in the game to participate with Community Foundation unless I'm a giver of a very high level. So
Right.
maybe an awareness campaign. And it made me think of, remember when American Idol came out and you had to text $10 and they raised all that money for one of the causes, to simplify it, where I think people are thinking that to give to Community Foundation, you're giving a lot of money and it's more complex. Maybe we're missing a large group of people who could be participating at a much lower level, but with volume could really have impact.
Yeah, truth. I think all of philanthropy is about growing a base of support. And I always say it's the pyramid. So you have to have a broad array of people who know you and support you in some way. And then the larger or the more specialized gifts come at smaller amounts over a longer period of time. Any other questions? I love all the comments in chat. Thank you very much. Andrew Wordle, you don't have a question?
There, I'll unmute myself. This might have, I had a friend here, so I was a little distracted.
Okay.
He's a potential fund holder at the Community Foundation, so I wanted him to be part of it.
Oh, thank you.
But did I see that statistic correctly, that 70% of the dollars go outside of the county?
That is for foundations.
That's for
For
foundations
private foundations, correct.
that are based here.
That are
specifically?
based and that grant here.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
surprising to me.
So for us, that was, to me, that means we need to do a better job of spending time with the the foundations that we know and work with and try to expand to others. And that maybe we need to do a much better job explaining the needs and the opportunities to give here, and to learn more about those organizations and what they give to. And maybe they don't know, maybe they care about epilepsy in children, and they don't know that at Memorial there's a specific researcher who helps children with epilepsy. So I see it as a big opportunity for us and for the community at large.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. All right, it's 1:01. I'm going to do a final call for question. I'm so grateful that all of you came today, and I'm going to check the chat box. Kurt, am I missing anything? No, we got it. Okay, so 1:01. We're wrapping up on time. James Donnelly is a wonderful board chair. Thank you so much for helping host today and for giving us the ability to do this study and challenging us to make sure we figure out the right ways to use the information. To Nancy Meyer, one of our board members, for being our champion, and to our great researcher, Dr. Shelley Robinson. And of course, Nancy Thies, who took this project on right after I started without knowing what in the world it was going to be. And she has stuck with it. And I hope you'll agree with me, has delivered a great, great resource and a place to begin so much of our work. You have to thank Abby on our team for getting the lunches organized, and the rest of the Community Foundation of Broward team for driving them to you, or for you stopping by to pick them up. We just wanted a chance to see your faces. Let's see. In a few weeks, our Fundholders and Legacy Society members will get a printed copy of this report. The feedback from today is helping us finalize it before we print it. So I hope you'll use it and share it with others. If you know of an organization that would benefit from hearing this presentation, please tell us. We want to keep ourselves really busy this summer, and this would be a great way to share this information throughout the community. So if you know of an organization, let us know, and we would be honored to share this information. We'd like to go on the road. And I want to remind you that we've set a date to be in person for our Community Builder celebration on Thursday, November 18th. It'll be at the Signature Grand. Arlene Pecora, one of our former board members and owner of the Signature Grand, will be hosting us. So please mark your calendar. We're going to be recognizing 7 Community Builder members. So it should be a really special evening. And I just want to thank all of you for joining us today, for your questions and for your love of our community. That's why we're all here. I want you to travel safe and do something fun this summer. We have to get out, have some good experiences, and we'll have some great joy to share with each other in the fall. So thank you again, and I wish you all a wonderful summer.